Soon. Okay.
9, 8,
4, 3, 2, 1. Hey everyone, I'm Shailene. Today I'll be hosting another episode of Ask the Professional series. We have with us today Larissa O'Donovan. Larissa is an empowered woman in leadership. She used to be the Vice President Global Talent and HR Operational Excellence for Avon, a $5.5 billion company. And now she's the General Manager of Human Resources at Lactalis. We're so glad to get to know her today. How are you, Larissa?
I'm well, thank you, Shay. And hi, everybody. Delighted to be here.
Glad to have you here today. Let's dive right in, shall we? I believe
Sure.
a lot of our members would like to hear advice from you, since some of them are still struggling in choosing their career pathway. So in terms of your education, what did you study in university?
Yeah, so at and I can also understand it, even though I'm a bit more advanced in years and what people will be listening. I do remember being at university and having that worry about career and not knowing. So I'm very happy to answer questions today. So at university, I studied Bachelor of Science and I majored in chemistry.
Ah, so you didn't study the areas in which you currently work for. Can I ask?
No, I didn't.
Ah,
So I think, maybe if I tell a little bit about my story, Shay, and how I ended up in HR. So yes, I did Bachelor of Science in Chemistry. I started work for Barlow World Coatings, and Barlow World is a patent coatings company that has Taubman's Bristol White Knight paints, and is a consumer goods business. It was a consumer goods business. So all the way from R&D through manufacturing, distribution, all the way through to retail sales and distributed and trade and customers like Bunnings, etc. So I started as an R&D chemist and did that, did my chemistry and with the white lab coat for a couple of years, and started to experience new product factory trials in our manufacturing facility, and started to get really interested more so in that side of the business. So I took an opportunity to become the quality manager. And so I ended up running the laboratory in the factory with a number of quality technicians. And then after a couple of years, I took an opportunity, or someone spoke to me about moving away from my technical area, and I became a production planner. So scheduling all of the batches through the factory. And then that led to me becoming a production manager, so running a part of the factory, to then becoming a manufacturing manager. And I think I was around 28 or 29 then. And so I was in charge of a very large manufacturing facility, the largest factory in the Barlow World company. It had almost, I think, close to 100, it was 90 odd, mainly men, 100% unionised manufacturing environment. And with paint, there isn't much profit or margin in paint. So running a factory and trying to be efficient and productive and drive better margins and profit for the company, we didn't have a lot of money to invest. So it needed to be done through people and through changing the culture, driving the right behaviour. So for 3 or 4 years, it was a tough gig, being so young and being in charge of much older people than me, a union environment, where I had to drive change, and that it wasn't easy. And so there was industrial action and going to the commission, but also empowering the leaders within the factory. And so we transformed the industrial relations climate. And after about 4 years of that, I was at the crossroads of what do I do now? A female leader in manufacturing industry is rare, felt pretty lonely. Had been a tough gig, and we'd come out the other end with a new culture. So I'm not sure what inspired me at the time, but there were a couple of other opportunities in the company. One was in HR, one was in retail sales. So I actually, very scarily, booked a meeting with the CEO of Barlow World, and went and got some career advice from him.
Wow.
So he gave me some great advice around, okay, this is what it would be like in retail sales. This is what it'd be like in HR. And he said one thing that really, I think, drove my decision to be in HR, and I wanted to be a real part of it, which was that they were investing in HR and building a new HR team, and that the HR function was going to become the engine room of the company, and that people are a company's greatest asset. And that there was going to be a lot of change, a lot of cultural change in the organisation, a lot of investment in the people and in the people agenda, and I wanted to be part of that. So that's when I actually joined HR, and I've loved it. So very different from chemistry, and very different from all the roles that I'd had. And I worked for a wonderful HR director at the time, and his advice to me was, go back and study. Go back and do your master's in HR. So I did actually end up getting a piece of paper with HR, very different from my science degree. And I think that was good advice. At the time, I thought, really, I don't think I need to. And his advice was, no, get the piece of paper, get the formal qualification. It helps with credibility. It gives you more theoretical foundations, and also taught me a life lesson that you never stop learning. So that's a little bit of a long answer, but it was a bit of a journey of where I've ended up in
that's
HR today.
Yeah. So that's my next question is about how do you I noticed that you've completed a master in this area, and so I guess your manager encouraged you to do the postgrad study.
Yeah, he did. He did, yes.
So nice.
And I think it was good advice. I think it was good advice at the time, because then I was also able to take the learnings of what I was studying and apply that in the HR role I was doing. And so I think it really helped embed the learning at the time. And also it was a humbling experience that after, being in the workforce for 10 plus years and being in a couple of management positions, for me to go back and study was refreshing.
That's so good. So in terms of your current job, could you tell me a bit more about your role and daily tasks?
Yeah, sure. So my role is responsible for anything that's people related, which is great. If you love people, it's great. And so it's for all employees in the workforce. And in today's workforce, that's different to what it was when I first started in HR, because you've got all sorts of, contracts and agencies and, and consultants, as well as full-time, part-time employees, a flexible workplace. And so really for me, it's about driving a people agenda that helps drive business performance, and also that it enables the business to achieve its objectives, whilst also allowing our people to grow and develop and make it a great place to work. So key areas of our people plan are FIND. So FIND's all around the talent acquisition, the recruiting, the attracting the right talent into the organisation, the employer brand, being an employer of choice. The next part of our people plan is about grow, and that's growing our people. So onboarding our new employees and setting them up for success, our learning, development, training agenda. Succession planning, so how do we enable career paths through the organisation? And then it's about perform, because we've all got to perform of whatever we're doing in life. And so that's around really having a good culture that suits the organisation, having engagement surveys, pulse surveys. We're actually launching a pulse survey on Monday to find out 12 months on how our people are feeling and thinking about the business, about performance management, so goal setting, end of year, mid-year reviews, that's all in that perform, and then reward. So really importantly, how do we pay our people? How do we make sure we competitively pay? What are our benefits? How do we really drive that discretionary effort, our recognition, our programs? And then the last one's enable, and it's really the enable is almost the foundations of the plan around our HR processes, our systems, technology, digital HR. And that's a different agenda to what it was when I first started, when everything was paper-based. So day-to-day stuff, I'd have to say too many meetings. If I could lessen meetings, that would be better, and too many emails. I think what I try to encourage in today's world is picking up the phone, which seems a little old-fashioned, but by the time you've drafted a long email. By the time someone reads it and then they respond, picking up the phone can be much more efficient at times.
Yeah.
But also, so each day is different. So it depends on what's happening. It can be very strategic of us doing our 2021 budget and our strategy and plans for next year. Could be dealing with an employee issue. It could be, workshops, leading training, drafting a letter of offer, doing an interview. So it's very varied. Each day is different, which makes it really interesting and dynamic.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So you have worked in various industries, such as business supplies, food production, and cosmetic industries. So do you think industry selection plays a crucial role in your career?
I think industry selection can help. And I think what I would recommend is that find the industry that's right for you. And you mightn't get it right. And actually working in different industries does give you different experience, broader experience. As I described in that first company I worked for, which was consumer goods for 12 years before I left, I then moved into a government role, into state government. Very different industry. And if I hadn't have tried it, I wouldn't know today that didn't suit me. But it does suit people because everyone's different. It's so each industry has a different pace, a level of maturity. If you're in a startup business and in technology, which is really fast moving and always changing, versus being in an essential industry like I am, which is got a lot of day-to-day pressure that you've got to keep. Cows produce milk 24/7. I work for a dairy company, so you can't take a day off because the cows don't take a day off. That's a different type of industry field to financial services. So I think industry choice, maybe when you're leaving university, I don't know, you may not make the right choice initially. If you're studying marketing, do you go into agency and do consultancy, or do you go in-house and actually be in charge of products and categories? So it just is very, but I would encourage everybody to try different industries, because I think that is really rich, and I've worked, in various industries, and each one is slightly different, and helps you continue to grow and learn as a person.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so you have great experience concerning international leadership in Avon and Lactalis. What is it like working for a multinational corporation?
Yeah, multinationals are good to work for, but they have their downsides too. And I think, multinationals are large. They have size and scale and complexity. It's not just one country, and so you're dealing with different countries, different cultures, and you have a sense of that if one part of the world is in recession, another part of the world isn't going to be. So it gives you a bit more stability, I think, than just being in a smaller company. And that you then also have the career opportunities around mobility, moving between countries, because multinationals have established talent and performance systems that enable that and encourage that. So if that's of interest, a multinational, I would recommend. I joined Avon specifically because they were headquartered in New York. And my aim was to go and work in New York. I got to Singapore with Avon, and then they changed the headquarters to London, so I got to London instead of New York. But so I think there are, I think multinationals give you that good ability to do that if that's what you want to do. Having said that, the downside of being a multinational in big corporation is that decision making can be a bit slower. They'll have a bit more governance, maybe a bit more bureaucracy than a smaller company will, where you can make decisions faster. And they may take a little bit more risk versus having to go through various levels of approval. So there's always pluses and minuses in whichever company you're in. But I've been lucky to work for a number of multinationals and had opportunities where I've been lucky enough to be able to move around various locations, and I think that is one big upside of a multinational.
So What's your opinion on like the cultural competency? Like any tips on how to develop cultural competency?
Yeah, cultural competence. That's a good question. So yes. So I think every part of the world has a different culture, and when you
Yeah.
travel, you experience that,
Yes.
don't you? I'm sure you've experienced it, Shay, in your travels, and I think it's Asia Pacific, very different culture to the US or the Americas, to
Yeah.
Latin America, to Europe, etc., to Africa, and so I think it's important also that we live in a multicultural world, and we live in a multicultural country like Australia. And so I think having that cultural competency is really important to be able to understand the different cultures and backgrounds of people, and to then be able to adjust your style of how you interact with others and how you communicate with others.
Yeah.
In Asia, when I was in Singapore, it's quite formal and it's very hierarchical. Whereas in the UK, it was much more relaxed and less less formal. And so you've got to adjust in the ways of how you interact and the ways that you put forward recommendations. And so I think doing research on culture, on different cultures, is really important. So it depends on what type of cultures you're working with or where you're going to be working. Google best friend, do the research, talk to people with different cultural backgrounds, just to understand how to best operate within that environment. And then also listen and observe a lot, because you'll pick up a lot of that cultural, I like to call it a nuance, that cultural nuance, those little things that you're never going to be able to research. It's only when you're in that moment in the culture or in that interaction with someone from a different culture that you'll start to pick up on things. So have your radar switched on. But I think cultural competency you'll build over time, and it starts to come naturally, where you'll almost, maybe just without you even knowing, that unconscious competence, you'll actually just start to move into that sort of cultural interaction without you even realizing you've changed your style.
Wow, incredible. So okay, how important do you think is it for corporations to have women in leadership?
Yeah, well, I suppose being a woman in leadership, I'm going to say very important.
Yeah,
And I do think it's really important, all jokes aside, very important, because I think and there's lots of actual research data that does back it up, that more women in leadership, where there is women on leadership teams, drives better business performance, because it's a stronger team. And it's a more balanced team. And so from a, not to overly generalize, but there are trends where, male leaders will be much more just focused on the numbers, very focused on the profit, the numbers. They'll be very focused on their career and what they can get out of it and what they can maximize. That's not to say that women don't have those characteristics either, but they'll tend to be a little bit more holistic in how they view things. They will maybe be a bit more empathetic and not just focused on the results, but it's how you get those results. So what's the culture, what's the behavior? And so it brings, I think, that better balance to a leadership team. And it doesn't mean that the women are bringing the softer side. It is more a more balanced side. And so I think that's really important, and women do value communication a bit more. And I think it's really important for leadership teams. You can't be in the ivory tower. You cannot be separate to the organization. So you need to ensure that as a leadership team, you're communicating both ways. You're not just communicating top down. You're doing it to enable conversations in the organization, so people know what that strategy is, what their role is in that strategy. How are we going with the business performance? Where do we need to improve? So those sort of things, I think women can bring a better balance to leadership teams.
Yeah, definitely. I noticed in Avon, 60% of the workforce is women. For ladies like me who strive to become influential and impactful, could you share some tips?
Yeah, of course. Yep. So you're right. Avon had 60% workforce of women, and a number of ladies in the leadership team, and it's the strap line is the company for women, so it did live up to that strap line or that vision. So my first advice is be confident and believe in yourself. And I'll probably say this a couple of times. Women are more self-critical and harder on ourselves than anyone is going to be. And so it's being confident, believing in your ability and your talent, but doing it with humility too. So not coming across as arrogant, but being confident, believing in yourself, knowing your brand. I think as women, it's even more important to know, what is my brand? What do I want to be known for in the business? Because therefore, once you know that, then you'll drive your own behaviour and how you act in the organisation, so that it's more consistent. I think to be the most impactful and influential is to know the business. So not only be a really good expert in your area of expertise, but also understand the business, understand other areas of the business, and talk business speak. Because that will actually just immediately, even if you're working with others that may not value women in leadership as much as maybe others, actually talking business speak, talking business language, having an opinion on areas outside of your expertise actually creates a lot of immediate credibility and impact, because they go, oh, okay, if it's Shay, actually Shay, wow, Shay knows knows her stuff. She knows what's going on in the business. So that creates immediate sort of impact. And so I would summarize it as self-belief and confidence, being the expert in your area, but also understanding the business and being able to just talk business.
Yeah, true. So would you advise like us reading the business news every day and get to know all the industries and news?
Well, it's or it's even knowing if you know your what's going on in marketing trends, or if you're thinking, if you're studying accountancy and you're wanting to look at some of the top accountancy firms, reading their annual report, because most companies now have an annual report. That would be my starting point. Whatever company, or if you're looking at particular industries, who are the big companies in these industries, and read the annual reports, because they will talk a bit about not just about themselves, but what's going on in the industry, particularly if they're an industry leader. And I think that helps. And then when you're working in a business, understand what the business plan is. And talk to other people in other departments. What's going on in your world? And I think that all helps.
Fantastic. What would you say are some of the barriers or challenges for a female leader in the workforce, and how to overcome them?
Yeah, good question. So I think there are a number of barriers today, and I think it's better, but they're still there. And they're still there in various companies in the world or in industries. And I think there are structural barriers where there may be ongoing networks or forums where it's tough to get an invite to, or there's institutional mindsets, that gender bias, that stereotyping that might be there with individuals, but also maybe in the culture. Then there's mindsets that or choices where it's not seen to be a positive, and it should, where women hold themselves back because they might have taken a career break to have a baby. They might have actually just wanted to have some work-life balance and don't want to work full-time, might want to work part-time. And so there may be, some choices where that's not seen to be positive, and it should be, or the individual mindset around that we'll hold ourselves back because, I've read that job ad and you know what, I don't tick all 12 of those criteria. I've only got 10 out of 12 ticks, so I'm not going to go for that. You know what? A man's going to go for it even if they've got one tick. So, it's around women sort of saying, you know what, I'm going to be confident, and I reckon, yes, I may not have everything that they're looking for, but I think I've got a lot to contribute, and I'm going to go for it. And I'm going to go into it confident and see how I go, put my best foot forward. So I think those sort of barriers, I think, are there. And so I think, it's not about being overly confident. It's just being confident in what your ability is.
Yep.
In organisations today. I don't think it's about creating women's networks or just doing diversity training. I think it's really about having an inclusive culture and an inclusive leadership team. Because for us at Lactalis, we're just about to relaunch our new diversity and inclusion strategy. And inclusion for me is about women, but it's also about people with different cultural backgrounds, religious beliefs, all of those things that create an inclusive environment for people to work in, regardless of who they are.
Oh, that's so good. What's your opinion on the post-pandemic job market in Australia?
Yeah, well, it's all in the news, isn't it? Everyone talks about the new normal. And we are in a new normal, and it's never. We're not going to go back to the way things were. So it's about being agile, and I think remote working is here to stay. So as you can see, I'm from home today. We got 50% in the office and 50% at home, and we alternate those weeks to minimise our risk of our workforce in case we have a positive case. And so. But I think beyond that, flexible working, and that's what people want nowadays, is going to be even more so. We're going to see corporations shutting offices completely and having virtual workforces, or having smaller offices because they're going to have a lot of people working from home on a regular basis. We're going to be doing virtual training, virtual workshops, digital training. I think in a lot of companies I've worked for, it's been a very small percentage of training that's been conducted. It's still a lot of that want of being in a room and doing that. And I think digital training will also be that sort of new way forward. I think the job market's going to be a little challenged for some time.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. But I still think there is great opportunities, and there will continue to be great opportunities for good talent. And there are a lot of industries, like my industry, which is an essential service, that isn't changed. We're still, in fact, we've grown a little in this pandemic, and there are other, industries around that are like that. And so even though the unemployment is growing and there may be more competition for jobs, I think we'll see, still very good opportunities. I think we will see people switching industries though. And maybe considering different industries and maybe what they were thinking in the job market. So as I've talked about, being an essential service, like in health and medical services, food, manufacturing, technology, infrastructure, some of those industries, I'd be encouraging, if you're looking in the job market just for the short-term future, they're going to be a bit more stable than maybe some others. That are struggling at the moment, like tourism or hospitality. There are some industries which are being impacted and will continue to be impacted, and that will then impact the job market. But if you are looking at jobs, I think at the moment, be a little bit more careful around the industry, do some research on the company performance, and really, because it is going to be a more competitive job market, you're really going to have to shine in the recruitment process.
It's really helpful insights for our members. Well, what changed in terms of the recruitment process, what do you think what changes have been made in the recruitment process?
Yeah, in the recruitment process, it's more virtual, more digital now, and so it's less of the typical 1, 2, or even 3 in-person interviews. It's by, like we are today, Zoom or WebEx or whatever it might be. A little bit more, I think, online elements to assessments. So, there may be an online, psychometric or answering some questions or doing a case study and sending that in, versus, maybe having long behavioural based questions. There may be different ways that companies will do that now, but it will certainly be very virtual. And I think, I interviewed someone internally in the UK in Lactalis only a few weeks back. So when you're actually having a virtual interview, I would encourage everyone to be mindful of what's in your background. She had underwear on her clothes horse in the background. Not very professional.
Not good. Yeah.
Now, and so I think it's, or you've got someone that's constantly walking past you in the background that's quite distracting for the interviewer. So I think, recruitment has changed and it is going to be more virtual, and the chances are you are going to be having interviews from your home, and so making sure that it's set up appropriately for that. But I also think we're still conducting interviews in person, particularly for senior positions. So how we do that with social distancing and all of the safety controls that you need to have today, there is still going to be that. I think recruiters and being one, but being very passionate about giving talent the opportunity, is that I think recruiters have to be more flexible in today's job market, in that people are going to want to switch industries. What I was just saying a few minutes ago. And giving someone that opportunity based on their potential. Okay, yeah, they mightn't have your industry experience, but if they've done some good things or they've studied really well and they're the top of their class, give them a chance. So I do think that I hope, this is not me saying what I think will change, I do hope that also recruiters will be more flexible in looking at the experience or the education that people have, to give people a chance and not become more conservative in today's job market. But the process will be very much more virtual than what it has been, and more online, and I think more online steps than what there has been.
Do you prefer a virtual recruitment process or in person?
I'm old school, so I do. I think there are, in the early stages of recruitment, there is value in doing either a phone screening, or you don't have to do phone screening now. Everyone, you can always get a video now. Having that sort of initial and making sure that there's that bit of chemistry virtually is really important. But I do think that actually meeting in person has the benefits of, because a cultural fit and a chemistry between a recruiter and a candidate is still really important. And video is good, but I don't think it's great to assess that. And so for me, it's still I'm both. I like to do some of it virtually, but I still like to, when you get down to the pointy end of the process, I think having an in-person discussion is really beneficial.
Yeah, totally understand it. So how, just to focus on some more general questions, in assessing talents, what do you typically look for as a recruiter? Yeah,
good question. I think first impressions are always important. And I don't know how many interviews I've done in my career, but it's rare, based on an early impression, if my opinion changes by the end of the interview. It's happened, but it's the minority of cases. So I think that first impression, so no pressure, but my first impression is really important. So be well presented, eye contact, even if it's hard, even if you're a shy person, eye contact is really important, because if you don't meet them in the eye, they're going to think, what are you hiding? And it could just be a confidence thing, but eye contact's really important. Smile, energy, so showing interest in the role. I mean, not bouncing around the room, but not being really quiet and leaving the recruiter with an impression of, do they want the role or not? So listening to the questions. So I always want them to have they understood the question, because if they give me a completely different answer, I'm like, well, okay, can they listen to what's being asked or what's being said? So listen to the question to undersure it. If you're not sure about the question, there is absolutely no harm in saying, can I just clarify, are you asking, or can you repeat the question? And also then what I look for is how the question is answered. So my advice would be, if you need to take a couple of seconds to construct your thoughts, take it. Rather than thinking, I've got to start talking immediately. And as you're talking, you're thinking and your mouth is running before you've formulated the answer. Because then you'll come across as waffling. So if you need to take a couple of seconds, if you're, actually, I'm really not sure about this question, like I've done with you a couple of times, Shay, I've gone, that's a good question, which has given me a couple of seconds. You then smile and go, oh, that's good. I've asked a good question. And it's given me a few seconds to go, oh, okay, my brain is catching up now. And I'll start answering the question. So I think using those little tips and tricks, and what I look for, two other things. I know it's a long list, but what I look for are two other things. One is if they've done research on the company. So have they gone to the website? Have they looked and, and have they sort of, and have a question on the company if possible. Oh, I see, you've got, you've got 2 factories in, WA. What do they make? Or you've looked it up and you've said, I didn't realise you had 15 factories in 6 states. I was really interested when I was on the website. It just shows that you've been interested and you've done research. Or if you can think of questions to ask, be good. And then following on from what I just said, questions are important. For me, interview could have gone really well. And at the end, the interviewer asks, do you have any questions? If the answer's no, that's a little disappointing as a recruiter. I don't think in any conversation or an interview you can cover everything. So having a few questions up your sleeve, even if most of them have been answered, asking at least one question shows curiosity, shows thinking, and also, makes them think, and they'll go, oh, okay, yeah, I like this candidate. So I think it's the first impressions. It's doing some research, asking questions, and also not being so nervous. That take the time to understand the question and formulate so that's what I sort of look for in an interview. I know it's a bit of a list.
Yeah, it's really helpful. I learned a lot from it. How important is it for graduates to possess leadership skills? To provide some practical advice on how to practice and improve this skill?
Yeah, so I think with leadership skills, it doesn't have to have been in a company. Like if you're graduating from university, the chances are you probably haven't had a full-time job yet. But along your life, you've probably had leadership opportunities. Whether it's been a captain of a football team, or you were the senior doubles partner in your tennis team, you were chess club captain or minute taker or of a book club, or whatever it might be, there will have been something. You could have been, sponsor of a young cousin, or you could have been a school prefect, or on the student representative council at university. There are lots of things, and so I would encourage each person to sort of say, well, where have I been a leader? Where have I had the opportunities to be a leader? Because that's really important. As a graduate, most recruiters aren't going to be wanting a graduate to come really experienced in leadership. They're not, because that's unfair. But to have had some leadership examples, particularly when they ask STAR questions, to be able to give examples around leadership, I think is important. And it's also showing, if you've done some research as to what leaders in the world or in Australia or that you found inspiring, and it could be a relative, or it could be I'm not sure it'd be Donald Trump, but it could be someone else in the world, so it could be a leader somewhere where you can give an example to say, okay, I mightn't have all the relevant leadership experience, but this is what I find inspiring in leadership, and this is what I would aspire to be. So I think there are various ways where you can really talk about leadership in an interview, and not necessarily have a lot of experience. But this is where preparation for the interview comes into it, because the chances are they're going to ask you some leadership questions. So how are you going to answer it? And doing that research.
Ah. So yeah, in terms of the star answers you mentioned before, some of our members are worrying about not being like able to give distinctive or outstanding star answers due to the lack of the experience and stories. So could you give some tips on how to sell yourself through a HR's perspective?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I ask star questions myself, can you tell me about a time you overcame an obstacle and what you did and what was the result? Or, tell me about a time when you had conflict that you had to resolve, or you performed well under pressure, or you'd made a mistake, or you solved a problem, or you juggled multiple priorities, So it's all those sort of questions. And the ones I've just rattled off are pretty typical that you're going to get, if not one of those, you're going to get probably a few of them. And again, I would advise that, there are fairly typical star questions that most people will use, most recruiters will use, because I think it's, as we talked about, recruitment process may change as to how it's being done, but the what is still pretty consistent. So those sort of things, it's all in the preparation. So again, it doesn't matter how old you are, you've always solved problems. If you haven't had conflict, you've probably had conflict you haven't realised. So you've had some conflict. You've had to juggle multiple things. I mean, my goodness, starting at university, and you've got lots of assignments and exams, because you don't get one exam that you get 3 months notice for that you can just study and you do nothing else. So you're always juggling multiple priorities, and life. In life you do. You've overcome obstacles, so just thinking through some examples that are relevant. So it's really, I can't probably encourage it enough, preparing for an interview, in going in and sort of saying, right, here's my experience. I've gone through my CV or my resume, whatever you want to call it. And I understand each elements of my resume, where my achievements are, where my strengths that I would love an opportunity to talk about. And you have some examples. Think about the questions and how you're going to answer it. Even as students, do it with each other. Take roles in being the interviewer and the interviewee, and do that and give each other feedback. I mean, for some tough roles, I've sat with my husband. He's not a HR leader, but I've sat with him and gone, I'm going to just give you a few answers. What do you think? And he's given me feedback. Because I know early in my career, particularly very early in my career, I've come out of interviews and gone, why didn't I give that as an example? Why didn't I answer it this way? And you know why? Because I didn't prepare. Because in that moment, as I said to you, you've only got a few seconds to answer it. You can buy yourself a few seconds by, delaying and collecting your thoughts, but you've only got a few seconds. And so preparing those sort of answers. And in every interview, you're always going to get questions you weren't expecting. That's life. And you'll just answer it the best you can at the time, and you'll learn from it. But preparation is key, and not focusing on, okay, I don't have the relevant experience. You have life experience. So far, you have life experience. So use those instead.
Yeah, okay. For students studying human resources, do you think it is more important to have a seamless academic progression or gain more work experience?
It's a bit of both. I certainly don't have the typical seamless academic progression in HR. I mean, as I said, I studied it, while I was in HR already. I think it's a bit of both. I do think that the best HR practitioners have worked elsewhere and not had HR roles. And I think you don't have to. you can study HR, start your career in HR, and they're and that's fantastic. I do think though it helps because when you're in HR and you're giving advice to employees, you're giving advice to managers on all people related stuff. You're writing HR policies, etc. If you've worked outside of HR, you can then bring that experience in, and for me, when I've led factories, when I've led different teams, when I'm having a challenging conversation with a manager and okay, their labour budget's over budget, and I've had to talk to a factory manager recently. I said, and he came up with all these excuses. And I said to him, mate, I've done your job. I've run a factory. I know it's tough, but I also know there's some things else you could be doing. And so I think that having experience outside of HR helps you be a better HR practitioner because you've experienced what maybe good HR looks like, what bad HR looks like. Or I now can bring a user experience or a more broader employee experience to writing this policy. So it's not so HR speak, it's more general speak, or it carries some credibility when you're giving advice. So I think having some experience outside of HR is good, but it's not essential. I think having a qualification in HR is important because as I said earlier, it gives you that theoretical foundations. But you can always study. You can still be studying HR and working in HR too. Or you can say, I'm committed to studying HR, but I'd love you to give me a job, and then I'll start studying. So I think I think that, I know I'm not completely answering the question one way or the other because I think it's a bit of both.
That's cool. So you would agree that what someone studies can't limit what field they can go into?
Yes,
right.
I agree, and I'm a living example of that. And it's quite common nowadays that you'll be talking to someone who you might think they've had the traditional academic career, academic qualifications, and they would have followed a more normal career path. And people aren't following that anymore from what they've studied to then where they end up. Because you can take left turns, right turns, what choices you make along the way. And so I think studying and having a qualification shows mental agility and commitment to, doing something that's not easy. So I think having a qualification is important, but what it is and where you end up can be either.
Yeah. So do you have any final advice for students pursuing a career in your relevant field?
Yeah, so I think with HR, I would, there's a couple of things. One is you may be working in a company and you're not in HR, but you do want to get into HR. And I would encourage you, if you can get a job in a company where it's got, a good size or at least HR function in it, and you can get a job in another team, do that, because then you can then get to know that HR team and you'll be a step ahead when there's a HR opportunity that comes along because you'll know the business, you'll know the culture, you'll be established in that business and you can get a HR job. So I think don't always sort of just go for the perfect job. Sometimes taking a sideways step or taking something else may still get you there. And I think with the job market in today's world too, getting some professional experience somewhere will be important. And it won't, I think in today's world, it doesn't limit you. You're not going to be labelled if you go and work in a project team, you're not going to be labelled a project team person for the rest of your career. In fact, project team's quite broad now. So my first advice would be open to different ways of getting into HR as a profession. I think having, a qualification is important. I think using social networks, link your professional networks, joining HR groups online, so either through professional groups through HR, if you can go to, HR events and just start to talk to people, talk to HR leaders. So many HR leaders love young talent and love talking to young talent. If they've got an opportunity to provide someone with potential, an opportunity, then, you meeting them and going to some forums or going to some conferences, there's freebies around, do that. And so I would encourage that as well. Yeah.
Okay. So finally, after telling us your whole stories of getting to where you are now and reflecting on your journey, what will you tell your 20-year-old self?
That is such a good question. And so for me, I probably said it a little bit throughout, is that self-belief is so important. And so if I give you a very quick example, I got rung up for, when I was in Avon, in the Australia New Zealand role, and an opportunity came up for Singapore. And so I met the Asia Pacific president in an interview. And afterwards I left that interview and I thought, I just bombed that. That was terrible. I waffled, and I beat myself up and thought, well, I'm not going to get a call. And then later on, and then I did. I ended up getting the position. I thought, wow, okay. And then he was my business partner. And so in Singapore, we had the office next to each other. And he said to me, that conversation we had was really good because I remember you said this. And I went, you know what? I thought I bombed that. And from his view, he told me his perception of that interview, and it was completely different to mine. And I realised how self-critical I was, and that I wasn't believing in myself, and I was beating myself up for absolutely no reason. So I would tell my 20-year-old self to be more confident and believe, and reflect, do a lot of self-reflection all the time and keep learning. I would tell my 20-year-old self to, keep learning and keep developing. And ask for a lot of feedback along the way. But the other thing I would tell myself is patience. And I'm not the most patient person. It doesn't come naturally to me. I've had to really work on it. But patience in career. And when I was in those Barlow World days, and when I moved through various positions, I even wanted to do that faster. And when I look back now, I think I did it pretty fast. But at the time, I felt slow and I was probably a bit pushy about it. And why can't I get, from production manager to manufacturing manager? Manufacturing manager comes with a car. Why can't I get that? And so I would tell my 20-year-old self, it will come, but be patient and just continue to do what you do. Work hard, prove that your contribution, and it will come. So I would say self-belief and patience is probably what I would tell my 20-year-old self.
Oh, interesting. Okay, these are all useful tips and insights. Thank you, Larissa, for your time this afternoon. All these fantastic insights, I believe our members would appreciate them very much. I appreciate really much. Thank you to all those tuning in today with us. Remember to join our Facebook group for information on our next interview, and have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Shay. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.